Welcome to this webinar. This is a webinar about IMP, which means imposition and calculation and planning and so on. And specifically, this is a webinar about irregular jobs in IMP. But before we get started, some housekeeping. First of all, in your webinar control panel, you have the ability to ask questions. Don't hesitate to do that. I will look at the questions at the end of the webinar and will make sure that you either get an answer during this webinar or I'll get back to you afterwards. We found out last time that this is a product where questions are common. It's a relatively technical product with lots of features and possibilities, so don't hesitate. Just ask what you want to ask and we'll get back to you. You also have my email address on the first slide. It will be repeated on the last one as well. So if you have anything that you want to discuss privately, you can do that as well. Same for demos or one-on-ones about the product in your particular workflow. But let's get started with the webinar first. We have a lot to cover, so if I want to keep to about the hour that I have foreseen, we would best get started with that. This is the agenda. As usual, the agenda doesn't mean much because we'll be covering it anyway. I'm going to skip over that very, very quickly. I am going to have this one slide, and I'm only going to do one slide of introduction because there is a lot of content to actually cover today. And because there was a webinar, let me put that on here, there was a webinar 2 weeks ago about IMP for bound jobs and rectangular unbound jobs. And that webinar has been recorded. It's on the 4P's website, so you can go to 4ps.com, look for the support menu, and under the support menu for tutorials, and in there you can filter on webinars or search for IMP, and you'll find all of the different videos that are on the website for IMP. The last one of those is so the most recent one is what I mean, is the one for the webinar of 2 weeks ago. If you need a little bit of a longer introduction than what I cover here in one slide, I would suggest that you go look at that webinar. There are a number of common techniques that I explained there that would make sense even if you are mostly interested in irregular jobs, so die-line jobs. But I will repeat much of that during this webinar as well. There's going to be a lot of demo, so don't despair. There will be plenty of information here. What is IMP? Very, very briefly, it's an automated layout planning software, and that means that it does a number of things very well, including creating very efficient layouts. And it does so for all kinds of jobs. Bound, rectangular unbound jobs, die-cut based unbound jobs, and a mixture of all of the above. We're going to be focusing mainly on die-cut jobs in this particular webinar, but it is definitely possible to take, for example, rectangular and die-cut jobs together and plan those out together. Now, the reason I don't call it imposition software is because it does much more than that, and calling it imposition software would be an injustice to the application. It starts by making very efficient plans and providing all of the details, costing details and technical details for those plans. So IMP can be used both in the planning stage and in the imposition pre-press stage. And during the demo today, we should actually see some of those possibilities as well. The reason I'm having a separate webinar about irregular jobs is because there is quite a bit of functionality out there that is specific to those kinds of workflows, whether you are in packaging or in labels, and I think it's worthwhile highlighting that specific functionality for those types of jobs. And that's what we'll attempt to do in the next 45 minutes or so. Okay, so let's get started. I have some slides with on those slides what I want to talk about, but in a way that is more for you afterwards as a reminder of what we covered than it is to follow during this webinar. I think it's much more interesting to actually see what I'm talking about and use the application. So I will refer to the slides once in a while as kind of a program if you want, but meanwhile we are going to go to Parallels, and I'm going to show you IMP. I have some demo files that are prepared, actually quite a few demo files, and we're going to start with jobs based on die cut, packaging jobs if you want, although it could be packaging and label. I'm throwing all of that in one neat little heap here. And I've already launched IMP. This is the application. It's a Windows-only application. I feel the need to say that because most of the software we distribute is Windows and Mac. In this case, it's Windows only. As you can see, I'm running it on a Mac using Parallels, and as far as we know, it will work on just about any virtual environment you want to use. So I'm running the application, and what we're going to look at is how to do a job based on a DXF outline. I have options now. I can go into IMP and say packaging product, start from DXF or CF2, or I can simply take the DXF file and drag that on top of IMP. The result is exactly the same. And what IMP replies with is a dialog window asking me what the cut lines, crease lines, and perforation lines are, and what the units are for the imported DXF file. So you specify what that is going to be, and then we say, okay. I have additional product properties. These are actually the basic product properties that I can set. Now, how many copies do we want today? Let's do, I don't know, 75,000 rather. And I'm going to say okay, and let's import that. And what we end up with is a single unbound component, which is what we expect to get. And that component has a name. That's the name of the file that we imported. It remembered the number of copies. It has set some material for that, a bleed for that, and so on and so on. And I can actually go look at the outline of that component, and then look at the job properties, starting again from these basic properties we already saw. A way to select all of the materials or the material this is going to be used on, and I'll come back very, very shortly in a second where that comes from. I can specify the grain direction. I'm going to put that on horizontal for this job. And then under printing, what I'm going to change is ask for 3 millimeters of bleed. I could also specify different finishing parameters for that particular job, and then I'm going to say okay. Now, that material that I highlighted comes out of tools configuration. In there, you have set up for all of the different devices that you support. I have a demo set up, so I have lots and lots of devices. But you specify all of the devices with their properties, both technical and costing. This is an area that we talked about a little bit more extensively 2 weeks ago. So again, go check out the video recording if you want to see more. On the other hand, I have all of my materials, and for the materials as well, I have technical parameters like folding depths and so on. And I have costing parameters as well, a definition of the sheet sizes or reel widths that are available, and so on. So all of that configuration I have done, and IMP will use information out of there whenever it needs to do something. Okay, so we have this product, and what we want to do is find a solution for it. And how do we do that? Well, to begin with, we're going to say plan, and that shows me all of the different presses I have, and I can select a bunch of these. And then have notice here that there is also possibilities for other finishing steps if you want. So if you have definitions of embossing, braille, foil, guillotine cutting, and if the job requires that, you can also select all of those finishing methods. Then under algorithm, I have different ways this job should be finished, and I have a bridge gap here of 3, which is fine. Irregular nesting is what we're going to do, and under options, I can ensure something about grain direction, and then everything else I'm just going to leave as it is, and then say OK. And what IMP does is it will come back with a number of solutions for what I have asked it to do. And I can select multiple of these solutions. And each time you can see the actual proposed result in there. Now, what I'm going to do is simply create the best one, the one that is the first in the list, and say done. And that gives me a plan, and it also gives me a layout. And this layout isn't perfect yet, but we'll refine it a little bit in a second. I have a layout here, and you can see that there is a color bar here at the top, and you can see that there are some other marks that were added by IMP automatically. This is because I have these mark templates that are defined, and for each type of press, there is an associated mark template. So if IMP comes up with a layout on a particular sheet size for a particular press, then that mark, those marks are automatically added through one of those mark layouts. Okay. This is fine. I'm in planning. I have my my layout, and actually I have something here that is called report setup, and I can use this to get a whole lot of information out of the process. And I'm going to also generate related information or reports. And if I do that, it will give me a PDF file that I can print. You can see the name of the company, and the logo can be customized as well. But then I have information about the components that were printed. There is only one component in this case, so I simply get the dimensions and everything else in terms of information for that one component. And then on the second page, I get information about the layout that was calculated. And that includes a whole bunch of technical information, cutting and creasing length. It contains all of the cost details of that job and a preview of that actual layout and a whole bunch of technical information related to that. So all of that is on there. And then the summary at the end says you asked for one job that generated one layout, and it gives me all of the final information. So that is the reporting. And if I'm in planning, I can use that. I can either print that or simply refer to it and get the information I need to quote the customer, for example. Now, the nice thing about IMP is that it works with a job database. So if I'm in planning, I can say, well, this was my work, so I am going to put that in here, and let's call that webinar. We can give it a job name on top of that if I want, and then I will check this into the database and simply close it. I can discard my changes now because the job was checked into the database and everything is fine. Now, if IMP is used by someone else in prepress later on, the customer meanwhile has approved the job and has come back and we need to produce it. So now I can say checkout. That gives me a view of all of the jobs that are in the database, and I can search for parameters. And this is the last one that got in here. It's actually the one that we just put in there, checked in. So I can now check that out. And when I check it out, I get the exact same component. I get the exact same plan as what I did before. Now, if I go to layout, I'm in prepress now. When I go to layout and look at this, I could say, well, this is kind of wasteful because this should only be a single cut here, because that's a glue flap, so we don't need any bleed there. So I can go back and go to the component again, to go back to my carton, and I can use one of these tools, this one here, mark no bleed region, to indicate any side of the carton where there is no need to generate bleed. So I will do that. And while I'm here, I will also add the actual PDF file because I've gotten that from the customer meanwhile. So where is my PDF? There, assign that. And now I have a job that has this no bleeds area and it has the actual PDF. And I'm just going to rerun the planning and see what happens. So all of that is still okay. And I'm again going to select the first one here. And when I now go to layout and we look at the imposition that was created, you can see that there is now a single cut for that particular area of the file. So this should give me something that is a little bit more efficient. And from here, we'll look in just a second how much more efficient it is. But while I'm here, I can show you that from here, I can actually generate the imposed PDF document. And you can preview all of the bleeds and so on. The bleeds, of course, are automatically resolved, so you don't have to do anything for that. And I can generate that PDF, or I can generate imposition or cutting JDF, or I can even generate the die line if I want. So let's just do that for fun. Generate that, that all looks good, save as a PDF document, and let me put that on my desktop. There we go. And when we look at the desktop, that generated that die cut for me. So there we go. Good, but I was going to show you what happened with those plans. So let me go back to the overview for this job. At the bottom here, you see both of the plans that were done. And what you can see here is that the second one is actually, in this case, cheaper than the first one, or less expensive is a better word. And why is that? Well, because I changed the parameters of the job by applying that or giving IMP the opportunity to do a single cut. I actually end up with a better plan than I had originally. You can make as many plans as you want. They simply end up in the list, and that means that it remains easy to compare them and see what exactly is going on and whether one is better than the other. Okay, that is what I wanted to show, I believe, with this one. So a single packaging job created from DXF, but it could also be CF2 or PDF. And then what we saw was automatic planning on multiple presses, marks placement, optimization possibilities for no bleed, and then the fact that you can generate all of those different output formats from directly from IMP, so from one application. Okay, so next. There are other possibilities here, and let me, what did I do with my demo files folder here? So let me actually go back and take another file. This is another job that came in, and I'm still in the planning phase now. And I'm going to drag this again on top of IMP, approve. I don't know how many jobs we have, how many copies we want with this. We'll put something in there. And I'm going to say OK, and then look at the actual job. Now, I could simply plan this in, and that's easy enough. So let me do that. Just take the same devices here and create a plan. and I'm going to take the first option here, and then we can have a look at the layout. So it did something. This is far from ideal, but it's I have a solution, and that was what it is about. Now, while I'm planning this, I might actually realize that the shape of this is probably very close to things we have done before. And if I could reuse a die that was created before, that should actually save a bit of money. Now, we already talked about a database, this job database where you can check in things and check out things. Imp has a possibility to work with its database in two different ways. It uses the database to put jobs and plans in there, so you can do this checkout, check-in thing. But it can also use a die database, and in the die database, it keeps all of the different dies that you've created. You decide which dies you put in there, and when I have a job that comes in, like this one, I can use the database to search for similar geometries. And because this reminds me of something else, I could say, well, let me have a look. The outline geometry must match. I can allow this to go as high as I want. So let me show this, and you'll see that there are wildly different things in there because I gave it a lot of tolerance here. If I scale that down a little bit, I can search again, and now from that die library, I have a lot less and a lot better matching dies that it found. And by simply clicking on here, I can get the different outlines, the two outlines, the original and the one that was found in the die library on top of each other. And I could zoom in. I have this little measuring tool that would let me check how much of a difference this will give. So what I'm looking at is a 2.5 mil difference, and only on the dust flaps that I have in the package here. So what happens if I simply use this one? I can update the geometry of my package with the one that it found in the die library, but I can also say update and auto plan, which will update my geometry and then immediately will also give me the additional planning option. And if I do that, again, I'm using the first option that Imp came up with. When I do that, it will use the die that was already created. So what does that mean in terms of costing? Well, if I look at the two plans that were created, so the first one, that was the original one. The second one was with the die shape that I got from the die library and then did planning again. You can see that the second one is actually a lot less expensive. What is interesting is to look at all of the costs. You can see that the printing cost is actually higher in this case, material and printing costs. But the total cost is lower because Imp not only looks at material and printing, it also looks at all of the finishing expenses afterwards. And the die making cost is obviously a substantive one, and it is avoided in that second plan that I have. So not only do you have the ability to import the DXF file and then auto plan a solution with it, but with that die library, I can actually see if there is already a die that I have that comes close enough to the one that I'm creating right now so that I can use that one. And if so, replanning can save me a considerable amount of money on the final result. Not so much the printing result in this case, but on the final job creation result. So, second example. Now, what if we want to do it differently? And we say that, and I have an example for that as well. What if we already have a die layout in the CF2 file? That's what I have here. And I really want to use that one to generate a particular job? Well, that's a possibility too. So instead of starting with a DXF file, I'm now going to generate a plan from a CF2 file. That's the plan that I'm working with. I can say create. Let's give that a material, and then select a press that would work for that, and say, okay. So in this case, instead of starting from a single component and asking Imp to do planning and come up with the best layout plan, I've done it the other way around, and I've told Imp that I have a die layout and I want to plan my job using that. And that gives me a plan and a layout that I can use. You can see that Imp says here the layout is locked. That's of course because we started it from a CF2 file. So the only thing that can be changed on here are the marks, because that of course doesn't change the actual shapes or position of the individual elements. Now this is really nice, but what I also want to do now is I want to take a bunch of products. Specifically, actually, I have a folder in here, or rather I have a CSV file in here, and in that CSV file I have the definition of a whole bunch of different jobs. And what I want to do is import those. So I can say replace the existing component with what I import from a CSV file, and my CSV file lives here. And when I import that, this component is no longer there, of course, because I replaced it. Instead, I have all of those. So this layout that I already created, I can now say plan with layout template. So create a plan, but instead of giving me all kinds of different options, create a plan with that particular layout template, and basically simply fill that layout template, and I've selected to do it one by one now, but fill that layout template with the jobs I've given you and with the different quantities for each job. So you're basically doing still doing a calculation of where the jobs need to be to get the best layouts for the quantities that you want for each of those jobs, but you're not giving Imp the freedom to change the actual layout. That is dictated by that layout template, that die layout that you imported. Now, I also have the PDF files for this, so let's search for those and make sure that we see something here. So that's this folder. They are matched by file name, so all the ones that are in green are actually found. I can assign that. And now I can go to layout. This again gives me the complete solution. And because color-wise this doesn't look very nice, I can select the Swap Jobs tool, and I can very quickly let me see how we want to do this. There, this is already better. So the little tool that I have here is a very fast way to look at the layout and to reorganize the jobs in that particular layout and group them by color, for example. The only thing I have to do is click on the first and the second one, and then those jobs are swapped on the actual layout. So what did we do here? We started from a die layout. We asked Imp to plan a whole series of jobs that come out of a CSV file into that particular layout. And then we manually finished up the layout by swapping some jobs around so that color-wise they are good to be printed. So a different way to work with the application, but as you can see, whether you start from a single DXF or PDF or you start from the other side, In both cases, it's possible to come up with the best layout. Of course, here as well, don't forget that I still have this reporting interface that will give me all of the different details of the layout I'm looking at, or if I want to, all layouts that were calculated in this particular job. Okay, so let's close this up. Yes, and that's the finish of the first section. Like I said, I have a lot of stuff to go through, so I hope I won't be too much longer than my hour or so that I had anticipated. Now, moving on from one job and imposing that, the next question, of course, is how can I do ganging of multiple jobs? And in a way, you've already seen that in the CF2 layout. That was, in a way, already ganging, but of course, that was just with the same shape, so that's not very, very exciting. I can make it more exciting by simply using a CSV file, and my CSV file in this example lives here. A bunch of labels. Each of these is a simple PDF file. There is a die cut in there, indicated with a spot color. And then I have a CSV file, and the CSV file very, very simply says the name of the job and the quantity that I want for each of those. So how do I do this in IMP? I start a product from CSV in this case. I say CSV format 1. Where is my CSV? That lives in my example folder there. What material do I want this on? Well, let's take perhaps a coated paper, 170 for example. 3mm bleed perhaps. I can again specify the name of the spot color used for the die lines, the cut and crease and perforation lines. And when I say OK, all of those components are imported. Where does the data come from? Well, the name, of course, comes from that CSV file. This also comes from the CSV file. And then the dimensions here come out directly out of the PDF. So IMP read the PDF file and figured out what the dimensions were. And then if I look at one of those, you can see that I have a little preview because we started this from a PDF file. And IMP shows me the outline for that particular job. So the die line is visible if you want. Okay, so I can create a plan out of this. Always the same thing. Go to Plans, click Add Plan, add the components you want. In this case, I'm going to add all of them. I can look at what these exactly are, and then say Plan. And well, I can plan it on whatever I want, but it's basically up to you, or up to the presses that you have. So the first solution, and then a second layout, and I think there will be 3 layouts for this one. There we go. And again, because I have the PDF files already, that's what we started from, I immediately get the plan with previews. I get the layouts here that show me how exactly that's going to look. Clicking on something on the sheet is going to, it might be a little bit difficult to see that and go to webinar, but if you keep your eye on the list of components on the left-hand side, when I click on one of those items on the sheet, that will flash the component on the left-hand side. Vice versa, if I click on something here, so if I click on one of these things here, it will show me, that's not what I wanted to do. It will show me what the actual, where that actual element is on the sheet. So that's just a quick way to see what you are working with. So this is something that where I imported a bunch of stuff from a CSV file, and the results were simply added onto a ganged layout. Again, I can generate the imposed PDF, I can generate imposition and cutting, or if I need that also the die line, for example, in HPGL, if we're working with some sorts of laser cutters, and so on. The reporting options are, of course, always there, and I can get a very long report now by specifying that I want reports for all of the components in the job. Well, if I show that to you very quickly, then this is what you get. So now I get a very long PDF file because for each component I have a bunch of information. And then at the end of the PDF, you get an overview of the layout we're looking at. You could also get an overview of all of the layouts that were generated, a complete build plan, but also all of the costing in here, including things like cutting length and so on. All of that information is on here. Okay, so this was simple. This is very similar to what we did 2 weeks ago for rectangular products. And in fact, if you have rectangular labels and irregularly shaped labels, or something else than the label, then you can also plan them on the same layout. So just add all of them as unbound components, ask Imp to plan that, and it will extract the die line from those jobs that have a die line. If there is no die line in a job, it will automatically use the trim box and do the imposition that way. So it's very, very flexible in that sense. However, what annoys me a little bit, of course, is that I have to create this CSV file because, well, that's difficult to do, and I would like a way to avoid that. And is there a way? Well, of course, there is a way. And the way to do that is by using naming conventions. You can also use XML, for example, and build this into your MIS, but I'm looking at the case here where you're going to use Imp in a more manual fashion. So the question is, how do I get information, job properties into Imp the most easy way? And what you see here is a list of very strangely named PDF files. The reason they are strangely named is because they will, through their name, convey information to Imp. And let me just grab all of them and drag them on top of Imp. And you can see that there is a dialog coming up, and watch the number of copies here. It says 1,000. So we would expect that every job that is created, every component that is created by Imp would have a quantity of 1,000. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to say OK. And if you observe now, what you'll see is that that's not the case. Each of these number of components or number of copies here is different. The reason for that is that the number of copies is contained in that file name. So you see a whole bunch of fields here, and each field is separated by an @ sign. And in between those, you have the different values that are conveyed to Imp. Now, how does Imp know what this file name convention is? And is there a way to change that so that it can match what I want? Well, of course. Let me show you, and this is going to get a little bit technical, but I'll try to keep it fun anyway. So I'm going to go to my installation folder. It's fun to do technical stuff once in a while. So this is my installation folder. In there I have impui.ini configuration file for Imp, and I'm just going to open that. Now in there you can see a definition of my company name. That's what is used on these reports, for example. And then you can see this thing that is enough to give everyone a headache, and I'm just going to copy that. And this is a regular expression. This defines the naming convention that Imp understands. And if I change this expression in the ini file, then I'm effectively changing the way Imp will look at incoming files and how it will attempt to interpret parts of the file name to extract properties. So this can be changed by you as long as it's a valid regular expression that you put in there. You can change this yourself, And when you change that, you can tell Imp how to do this. Now, I'm going to make this a little bit easier. So let me close this ini file, and I'm going to take you to a website, first of all, to understand what is going on. This is a really cool website. Because this is a regular expression, and because this website is specializes in showing you how regular expressions work, I can actually paste that regular expression in there and show you what is going on there. So I pasted that regular expression in this top field here, and then I'm going to paste my file name into the bottom field, and you can see that it says one match. So the file name actually matches the regular expression I gave it. But more importantly, what this website tells you is a breakdown of the different parts of that regular expression. So it shows you that in the regular expression, there is a definition of an ID, a name, number of copies, grade, weight, and bleed. And when you look at that file name that I pasted in here, it tells me that the ID is 7770, the name is cherry label, quantity 22,000, and so on. So just to make you understand or show you that this is indeed a regular expression, it's not magic, it's actually possible to write these things yourself, and to show you what the different parts are. And then you're going to tell me that it's still really, really difficult and you don't want to do this. And I understand. I have a very thick book about regular expressions, and I do whatever I can not to have to open it. So let me show you a better way. If you download the little tool that is also created by InSoft, that tool is called Pluto View. If I run that, what Pluto View does is simply open up, let me remove everything else here, it will simply open up a small window, and in that window are all of the different properties, attributes that you can actually pass to Imp through a file name convention. So these are all the properties that I can define in a file name. And what I can now do is say, well, let me see which ones I want. The ID and the name are important, copies, width is not important, and height also not important, because Imp can extract these automatically from my PDF file, so I don't need to specify that. Grade and paper weight are important, bleed is important, and then maybe what I also want is binding, but binding is only important for bound jobs, so I'm going to make that optional. So you specify what the different properties are you want in that file name, and then I can also specify what the order is. If I prefer to have the name first, then I can swap that here, and at the end I simply say generate and copy expression. There we go. And if I now have, let me get back to that website again. So you paste that new regular expression that was pasted, and then you can see that now the name field is first. So if you look at how this was understood, Imp, if I don't change anything to the file name, Imp will now think that name is 7770 and ID is cherry label. Why? Because I've changed the order of the fields in that expression. So you don't have to write these yourself. The only thing you have to do is launch Pluto View, set the required and optional fields correctly. With the arrows, decide the order in which you have these things in the PDF name, and then you say generate and copy, and you will paste that in that configuration file for Imp, and from that point on, Imp will understand how to deal with that. Isn't that really cool? So if I give my PDF files the correct name, I can simply drag them on top of Imp and everything else happens automatically. Okay. Now, all of this is still automated planning and so on, but I still have to do things, and I prefer being more lazy than that. So I would actually prefer not to have to do anything. Hands off. I don't want to touch anything. And that can be done too. That can be done with ImpFlow. And for those of you who were here for the webinar 2 weeks ago, I talked about Imp and ImpFlow and the fact that you had to quit Imp before launching ImpFlow. Well, technology moves quickly, and actually that's no longer the case. You can use both applications at the same time meanwhile. If you haven't seen ImpFlow before, then again, go look at this webinar recording. But very shortly, it's an application that allows you to define hot folder setups, flows. And each of those hot folder setups has an input folder and an output folder defined, and I can drop stuff in there. And if I go to my demo files, I have these hot folder setups, so inputs and an input folder and an output folder and so on. And if I look at how that is built, well, this is my input folder, this is my output folder, and then I have a number of actions that are added into here. And in this case, I'm starting the job from a CSV file, again, because I want to do ganging. And I am specifying all of the different parameters. For example, where do the PDF files live? What do I want to do? I want to create a plan. Do I want to handle all components or only bound or only unbound or and so on and so on? How do I want to plan that and where do I want to plan it? So in each of these steps of the workflow, you specify all of the properties of that particular step. And then at the end, I simply say activate. And now if I activate that, I need a file to drop in there. So I'm going to use this CSV file. The PDF files live here. That's the folder that I specified in there as well in ImpFlow. And I'm simply going to copy that CSV file into the input folder. And you can see that Imp is actually starting to do that. Created a plan. It added 6 components to the plan. And then it is exporting the imposition PDF and so on. So it works a little. It has some work to do. And once it is finished, you'll see that this log item here that is now in light red will be changed to green. There we go. And that means that the work is totally done. And I can go look, first of all, on input. The result is dropped in a done folder. It could also just be deleted, but that's how this particular workflow is set up. And then on the output, I have the product file, and this I could open in Imp to see what was done. So if I have Imp, I can simply drag this on top of Imp, and that gives me all of the components and how they were imported, and it also gives me the actual layout that was created. So if I now want to change something manually, I still can. But it also generated the rest of the information I've asked for. And this is just one example, an imposed PDF file. Well, it generates that. And in this case, it generated it in a folder for the specific device that I asked that it was planned on. So the output folder can be decided with variables where each of these variables can tell you how that particular folder structure needs to be where the output is generated. So totally hands-off. The only thing that was that I did was I dropped a CSV file in the input folder, and in the output folder, I end up with all of the results that I asked for. But of course, this is again with a CSV file, and there was one very annoying limitation to ImpFlow, and that was the fact that if I just want to take a bunch of files and I want to impose them, I always had to create either a CSV or an XML file in order to do that. And sometimes that's great for integration with MIS systems and so on. But sometimes if I just want to do something manually, group some files together and get an imposed flat back, then it would be nicer if I didn't have to do that CSV thing. And if I look at the second flow in here, so if I show you what that one does, well, this is one that does a product from PDF. And watch this. It says use default parse expression. Remember what we talked about with file naming conventions and how file names can be used to set properties during the imposition process or the ganging process. Well, this is exactly the same thing. So I'm now using in this workflow the same regular expression that IMP is using to recognize file names, but I could also put my own specific convention in here. So for different hot folders, you can output a different file name convention. Then it adds components to a plan, it does the planning itself, it does impositioning, and it saves the product. So relatively straightforward, all of this. And I'm just going to start that. Now, what does that mean? It means that if I take a PDF file and I drag that into the input folder, it's already done. This PDF file, as you can see, has this naming convention that we talked about. So the planning that will be done, there we go, this is the imposed file. The planning that was done by IMP flow will take all of that into account. Let me open up IMP again, import this, look at the, I want to see the actual file and what we have here at the same time. There we go. So look at what we have here. This was 2,000 copies. That was as it is in the name convention. The name comes out of there. The job ID comes out of there. The material was taken from there, and the bleed was taken from there as well. So this is still in flow, but showing you that for a single file, if all I want to do is imposing a single file and get this, I can do that by using that same naming convention as I had on IMP itself. Of course, that's not an answer to my question. I wanted to take a whole bunch of files and gang them together automatically with IMPFlow, and that can be done too. The way it can be done is not by dragging individual files into this IMP folder, IMPFlow folder. If you do that, then each of those files will be ganged independently, because IMP cannot know which files should be ganged together. But if I create a folder and I make sure that the name of that folder starts with a plus sign, that's important. So I have a folder here, it can have whatever name I want, but the first character needs to be a plus sign. If I take that folder and I drag that whole folder in the inputs, let's see what happens. Then you can see adding components, added 18 components to plan, and then the imposition is generated again. So if you drop a folder like that into an input folder of IMPFlow, then on the output side, you are going to end up with a ganging of all of the different files in that folder. So IMP now automatically calculated all of the different layouts for that particular imposition that was done, right? So if you have labels or packaging files or whatever, and you want to create ganging or impositioning, and you want to do that in a hands-off way, then IMPFlow, with its ability to set up different workflows, is totally capable of doing that. It can generate all the same types of outputs as IMP can in a totally hands-off way without hitting any buttons anywhere, and can put the results in the folders that you want, and you can be very specific about that. And it has the ability to do this either starting from a single PDF, a single DXF, from a CSV file, from an XML file that tells you where all of the different components are, or starting from a folder with files. And if you start from a folder Like I said, the first character has to be a plus sign, but the files in that folder can still use that naming convention that we talked about as well. So all of these files will be ganged together. If I want that one of them has 5 millimeters of bleed instead of 3, the only thing I have to do is change that file name, and the automatic process afterwards is going to take care of things. So if you have an automation solution like Automation Engine or FileTrain or even Switch that can group files together in a folder, that can rename files, those typically are very, very easy operations in those types of applications, then you simply gather the files that you want to gang in a particular folder, and you make sure that that folder is dropped into the input folder of ImpFlow, and you get totally hands-off calculation of layouts, imposition PDF, imposition JDF, die lines, anything that you want out of there for all of the components that you had in that input folder. Okay, I think that's about what I wanted to cover today, and it's also about time. That's perfect. So in summary, what we looked at today is doing imposition or ganging of components that are not rectangular, that are irregular, so using a die shape. And we've talked about doing single packages. We've talked about the die database and how you can use that to see if you have dies that are already produced for previous jobs that are very, very similar to what you're doing now, and how you can save money doing that. We talked about using a fixed die layout and simply using that layout to calculate or do a ganging of components in that layout, so calculating all of the different quantities and the most efficient way of layouting those. Then we talked about CSV files and ganging irregularly shaped labels in the example using a CSV file. We also talked about naming conventions and regular expressions and how you can use that to transmit information to IMP. And then in ImpFlow, we talked about two things, either impositioning or ganging using a CSV file as input, or simply dropping a folder in IMP and having everything in that folder ganged together. If there are any questions that I haven't answered yet, then I will be very happy to answer that. Is IMP just a client tool? I think I already answered that meanwhile, but it's a good question. It's worth coming back to it, Valentina. Is it only a client tool? No. So IMP itself is a client tool, of course, that can be used either in the planning stage or in the pre-press stage. But if you look at ImpFlow, you can definitely integrate that with a server. In fact, most of the projects that we get involved with consist of some type of integration, if not in the first phase, then in the second phase. And that integration can either be done, like I showed, by dropping folders of files into an input folder. That's, of course, very simple. I can also work through CSV, but usually when you do an integration like that, the integration will happen through XML. And the ImpFlow application, let me see, I have one here, I think. The ImpFlow application can actually have a very, very simple flow where I'm accepting XML files, and that can be the XML variant from IMP itself, but it can also be metrics MXML. And in that scenario, you simply drop an XML file into the input folder. That XML file can specify what the jobs are, so where the jobs live, and IMP will automatically pick them up and impose them. But it can also, that XML file can also contain instructions on what needs to happen. So it can contain the different process steps, the things that you normally, if I take another flow, so the things that normally would appear here, well, those steps can also appear in the XML file. And that means that from the MIS system, you can write an XML file. That XML file is dropped into the input folder of ImpFlow, and everything else is fully automatic. The XML file can also specify where the output files need to be generated to give you a completely transparent integration into the MIS system, for example. Okay, I think that's the only question I had not answered yet. If there is anything else, let me just put my last slide on here again. If you have any other questions about IMP, if you think it would be nice to see this with your own files, then we can definitely prepare an example or set up a one-on-one GoToMeeting to go into more detail. Like I said, there are a number of videos on the 4Ps website that you can watch as well. Some of those are small feature videos highlighting one particular possibility of IMP. Some of those are these webinar recordings that go over the product in some detail or provide an overview. So check out those as well. And any remaining questions, simply send us an email and we will be more than happy to help. That's what I wanted to cover today. It is 5 o'clock, so it is time to go do something else. I hope you had a good day so far, and I can only wish you a very, very nice rest of the day. Hopefully until we meet again at the next webinar. And for any and all questions, just get in contact. We're there for that. Thank you. Have a great day. Until next time.